Discipline through fear defined one of the Roman discipline machines. But what kind of army forces its own men to kill each other to maintain order? With trembling hands, they hoped fate would spare them from death by their brothers. Rome didn't conquer the Mediterranean with better steel or stronger soldiers. They did it with something far more powerful: complete control over every man who wore the legion's sandals. From the moment a recruit took his oath, the army owned him. Centurions watched for the slightest hesitation, the smallest break in formation. Step out of line, and you wouldn't just face pain, you'd face something designed to break you worse than any enemy could. The legion worked like a machine because it had to. Every soldier knew his place, literally. Men marched in precise ranks, slept in assigned tents, and even relieved themselves at scheduled times. There was no room for individuality, no tolerance for mistakes. Historians found records showing centurions carried vine sticks to enforce instant correction. 1 strike for being slow, 2 for dropping your shield. The message was clear: mistakes had immediate consequences. Other ancient armies relied on payment or patriotism. Greek hoplites fought for city-state pride. Carthaginian mercenaries fought for gold. But Rome's soldiers fought because disobedience meant ruin. Deserters didn't just lose their pay, their families lost land rights. Cowards weren't just beaten, they were erased from civic records. The system turned fear into fuel, making terror of commanders stronger than terror of battle. Modern armies build unity through shared purpose. The Romans knew something darker, that shared trauma binds men tighter than any ideal. When Crassus decimated his troops after they retreated from Spartacus, he didn't just punish 50 men, he forced the remaining 450 to murder their own comrades. Survivors wrote about the nightmares that followed, but they also fought harder in the next battle. Rome turned psychological wounds into loyalty by making the army the only refuge from the horror it created. Archaeologists found letters between soldiers where discipline overshadowed even family worries. One man wrote, "If I disgrace my century, my brother won't inherit our father's farm." The threat extended beyond the individual. Your failure meant generations of shame. Soldiers didn't just fight for Rome, they fought to avoid becoming the reason their entire bloodline suffered. The system's genius was its predictability. Every man knew the exact price of failure. Steal food, death by clubbing. Retreat, 1 in 10 executed. The punishments were so well documented that soldiers could calculate risks like merchants weighing profits. Obedience wasn't about honor, it was cold math. Surviving meant following orders, no matter how suicidal. What's chilling is how well it worked. Studies of Roman battle records show disciplined legions won against forces 3 times their size. Even rebel leaders who defied Rome copied its methods exactly. The terror didn't just create obedience, it created soldiers who couldn't imagine living outside the system that tortured them. When your choices are death by Rome or death by your own brothers, the shield wall starts to feel like safety. Crassus faced a problem during Spartacus's rebellion. His legions feared the gladiator more than they feared Rome, so he turned to an ancient punishment that hadn't been used for generations: decimation. 500 men from a disobedient legion stood in formation, each one ordered to reach into a helmet. 9 would draw white pebbles and live. 1 in every 10 pulled a black stone, and his comrades would beat him to death with clubs. The poet Lucan called it, "Chance became the arbiter of doom," and he wasn't exaggerating. This wasn't execution, it was ritualized murder disguised as justice. Imagine the moment when fingers closed around those pebbles. No skill or bravery mattered here, just luck. Some soldiers reportedly tried to swallow their stones to hide the result. Others formed suicide pacts rather than face the lottery. The condemned didn't die quickly. Sources describe how their own tentmates had to surround them, swinging until flesh split and bones shattered. Officers watched to ensure no one held back. The military writer Frontinus noted something disturbing. Legions that survived decimation often fought like demons afterward. Rome had discovered that shared horror binds men tighter than any oath. The math was simple but devastating. Desertion meant possible escape, but staying meant a 10% chance of being butchered by friends. Survivors wrote of men losing their minds afterward. One account mentions a soldier who kept staring at his hands, whispering that they'd killed Caius, the man who shared his bread just that morning. That was the point. Decimation didn't just punish the guilty, it punished everyone. The witnesses carried scars no enemy could inflict. Every time they looked at their comrades, they remembered what they'd done, and what might happen again. Records suggest some decimated units developed eerie rituals afterward. They'd leave empty spaces in formations where the dead should stand. Others reportedly fought without helmets in battle, either hoping for honorable death or proving they feared nothing now. Rome didn't just want obedience. It wanted soldiers who'd charge certain death because the alternative, facing their own legion, was worse. When Crassus finally crushed Spartacus, historians noted his troops showed no mercy. Maybe they couldn't afford to. Every enemy killed meant one less reason for Rome to turn its wrath inward. The true cruelty lay in forcing survivors to live with what they'd done. Archaeologists found graves with clusters of battered skeletons, likely decimation victims, buried apart from regular legionaries. But the living suffered more. One letter recovered from a military camp mentions a veteran who wouldn't eat with others, always sitting just outside the circle. When asked why, he said he still heard the sound of clubs on flesh. Rome understood that killing a man is quick, but breaking him lasts forever. Decimation wasn't about justice. It was about ensuring no soldier ever forgot who really controlled his fate. The centurion's whistle cut through the morning air. A soldier stood trembling in the center of the formation. His crime simple. He'd stolen an extra ration of bread. His tent mates formed a circle around him, clutching wooden clubs. This was fustuarium, Rome's answer to theft and desertion, not execution by officers, but death delivered by the men who'd slept beside you. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus recorded cases where soldiers chose this fate over living with dishonor, walking voluntarily into the circle of their executioners. Unlike decimation's random lottery, fustuarium punished specific crimes with absolute certainty. The condemned man's comrades didn't act reluctantly. They swung with purpose. Some accounts mention rewards for participation, turning brothers in arms into willing killers. The military writer Vegetius noted that soldiers often feared this punishment more than battle itself. Imagine swinging a club at a friend who'd shared your watch last night, knowing refusal would put you in his place. Archaeologists find the victims' bones tell silent stories. Some skeletons show multiple healed fractures before the fatal blows, evidence of previous discipline. Others were buried separately from their units, denied even in death the comradeship they'd failed in life. But the living suffered too. One soldier's letter describes waking to see the empty bedroll where his friend had slept, the stains on the ground not quite scrubbed away. Rome didn't just kill offenders, it forced everyone to carry the memory. Modern armies remove criminals from service. The Romans engineered something more sinister, a system where every soldier was both enforcer and potential victim. Your tentmate's crime could make you an executioner tomorrow. Your moment of weakness might make him swing at you next week. The historian Polybius described how this created a legion that policed itself, where men reported on each other to avoid being implicated. The true genius, or horror, of fustuarium was its psychological precision. It didn't just punish the guilty, it weaponized loyalty. Soldiers who'd shared meals together now shared blood-stained clubs. Men who joked around campfires now avoided each other's eyes. Vegetius wrote that disciplined legions fought hardest, but at what cost? When camaraderie becomes complicity, obedience no longer needs officers to enforce it. The men do it for you. Some accounts suggest the condemned were given chances to speak. Imagine those last words echoing across silent ranks. An apology to friends, a plea for mercy to men already raising their clubs. Then the sound, wood on flesh, bones cracking, the gasps of soldiers trying not to vomit. Afterwards, the sentry would march away, leaving one less voice in their formation. Rome didn't just demand obedience, it demanded you sacrifice your humanity to prove it. The paradox was that it worked. Units that endured fustuarium developed a terrible efficiency. Men followed orders instantly, not from courage but from knowing the alternative. The historian Tacitus recorded a mutiny where rebels used fustuarium on their own officers. Rome's methods were so effective, even its enemies copied them. In the end, fustuarium wasn't about justice, it was about control, so absolute that soldiers became both the threat and the threatened. Every clubbing taught the same lesson. The Legion could make you kill your friend today and make someone kill you tomorrow. Survival meant becoming exactly what Rome demanded: a perfect soldier, devoid of mercy, incapable of disobedience. Because in that circle of raised clubs, there were only two roles, and you'd play both before your service ended. A veteran of 20 battles knelt alone beyond the camp walls, clutching barley gruel in his bare hands. His once gleaming armor lay discarded nearby, the bronze fittings stripped away by his former comrades. This wasn't temporary punishment, it was systematic erasure. Reduced to the status of a camp servant, he now ate barley instead of wheat, watching from the outskirts as his sentry marched past without glancing his way. The humiliation cut deeper than any wound he'd taken in battle. Roman commanders understood that killing a man was straightforward, breaking him was more effective. Status reduction combined physical hardship with psychological torment. Barley rations bloated stomachs while starving muscles. Camping beyond the defenses left men exposed to raids and the elements. But the true genius lay in the social isolation. Soldiers under punishment wore no uniform distinctions, just a tunic marked with a circle of black dye. Their silence was enforced. Speaking to them risked sharing their fate. Letters recovered from Vindolanda fortress revealed desperate pleas from disgraced soldiers. One man offered to pay his entire savings for reinstatement. Another volunteered for a suicide mission against a Germanic war band, writing, "Better death than another winter outside the gates." These weren't merely disciplined men. They were ghosts haunting their own legions, enduring hunger and danger just for a chance to become visible again. Modern armies demote or discharge offenders. Rome engineered something more insidious, a punishment that didn't end. Even after completing their sentence, reduced soldiers carried the stigma. Promotion became impossible. Comrades kept their distance. Some never regained their tent assignments, sleeping permanently near the latrines. The message to others was clear. One misstep could exile you from the only family you had left. The system's cruelty revealed itself in small details. Punished soldiers still had to participate in drills, standing as living warnings during training. Their weapons were checked more rigorously, their gear scrutinized for imperfections they couldn't afford to repair. When the legions celebrated victories, they served wine to their former equals. Rome didn't just want obedience, it wanted men so terrified of losing their place that they'd endure anything to keep it. Archaeologists have found evidence of this lasting shame in military records. One recovered roster shows a soldier demoted in 89 AD Street Ill, listed as barley rank 5 years later. His name appears last on every roster, his pay rate half his peers, yet he served another decade, proof that even broken men couldn't imagine leaving the legion that had broken them. The ultimate power of this punishment lay in its visibility. Every soldier saw the reduced men shuffling through camp, heads lowered under the weight of their disgrace. They weren't hidden in stockades or prison tents. They were on display, walking reminders of what happened when discipline failed. Their slow starvation wasn't just physical. Rome was starving their identity until only perfect soldiers remained. Some rebellions began when reduced soldiers banded together, knowing they had nothing left to lose, but most endured silently, clinging to the hope of redemption that rarely came. Their existence answered a brutal question: what good is punishing the body when you can punish the soul instead? Rome's legions learned through these men that shame could forge obedience where pain alone might fail. The reduced soldier's fate asks us which is worse, to die quickly by a comrade's club, or to spend years begging for scraps of dignity from those who once called you brother. Rome's answer was brutally effective. Both options taught the same lesson. In the legion, you belonged completely, or you didn't belong at all. Enjoyed this glimpse into Rome? Feel free to like this video, subscribe and turn on notification. And if you want more stories like this, stick around. The Vergae rods cut through the air before striking bare flesh with a wet crack. This wasn't just punishment, it was a complete dismantling of a soldier's dignity. Legionaries were stripped naked before their units, forced to kneel before the very standards they'd sworn allegiance to. The wounds would heal, but the shame never faded. Some men begged for death rather than face their comrades afterward. Archaeologists found a tombstone near Hadrian's Wall, where a veteran deliberately omitted his 25 years of service, the memory of his flogging still too painful to acknowledge decades later. Roman flogging differed from other ancient armies in its theatrical cruelty. Greek commanders disciplined soldiers privately, but Rome turned beatings into public performances. Whole legions were made to watch as the rods rose and fell. There was never any doubt who wielded power here. Each lash served two purposes: to punish the offender and warn every watching soldier. New recruits endured this horror during training, their first real lesson being how Rome dealt with disobedience. The screams of the punished echoed through camps for hours, sometimes days if infection set in. Medical care barely existed for these men. Basic treatments like vinegar washes or spiderweb dressings, used to clot blood, might be applied if an officer deemed the soldier worth saving. Many weren't so lucky. Accounts describe men collapsing into feverish delirium as wounds festered. Death often came slowly, a final humiliation for those who survived the initial beating. Even those who recovered carried the scars, both visible and invisible. Some veterans developed ritual behaviors, constantly adjusting their tunics to hide old marks from view. What made flogging especially cruel was its unpredictability. Unlike decimation's clear rules or fustuarium-specific crimes, the verge could fall for almost anything. A misplaced spear during drill, a dirty uniform inspection, even laughing at the wrong moment, all risked the rods. Soldiers never knew which mistake would be their last. This constant state of tension kept legions perfectly obedient. The fear wasn't just of pain, but of being reduced to a screaming example before hundreds of watching eyes. Yet surviving soldiers often became Rome's most loyal fighters. Psychologists call this identification with the aggressor, a desperate coping mechanism where victims adopt their tormentors' values. Flogged legionaries enforced discipline more harshly than officers, as if proving their loyalty could erase their own shame. Epictetus wrote of watching a veteran interrupt his own flogging to salute a passing tribune. The mind breaks before the body does, and Rome exploited that weakness perfectly. The legacy of the verge extended beyond military camps. Wealthy Romans used similar rods to discipline slaves, creating societal echoes of legionary terror. Even crucifixion victims were often flogged first, making the practice synonymous with utter domination. For soldiers, the mere sight of the rods being gathered could trigger vomiting or fainting spells years after their last beating. Rome didn't just want obedience, it wanted men who'd obey without thinking, their bodies reacting to command before their minds could consider resistance. The ultimate proof of flogging's effectiveness lies in its rarity. Records show most soldiers went years without seeing the rods used. The threat alone was enough. Like a sword kept permanently unsheathed, the verge didn't need constant use to maintain control. Their presence in every century's equipment chest sent a clearer message than any speech. Every soldier knew the price of failure, heard the phantom whistle of rods in his dreams, and marched accordingly. When a legionary failed in battle, he didn't just lose status, he lost his entire identity. Stripped of citizenship, he vanished from Roman law. Contracts dissolved. Marriages were nullified. His children, present or future, could never claim Roman heritage. It wasn't punishment, it was erasure. A man who once carried the empire's standards became legally non-existent. This wasn't just about lost pay or rank. A disgraced veteran couldn't testify in court, inherit land, or be remembered with honor. Some families even listed living men as deceased in tax records. Tombstones ignored them. To a Roman raised on duty and legacy, being forgotten was worse than death. Corpses were mourned. These men became shadows. Modern armies discharged soldiers. Rome erased them. Archaeologists have found desperate petitions from veterans pleading for their names to be recarved on monuments. Even emperors weren't spared. After Domitian's fall, his name was literally chiseled from stone. Ironically, the more Rome tried to forget, the more history remembered. Some outcasts became mercenaries or gladiators, roles forbidden to citizens. Their Roman discipline lingered, formations precise, swords sharp. They couldn't stop being legionaries, even in exile. Rome's cruelty was generational. A soldier's disgrace could taint his grandchildren. Yet this very fear bound men tighter than chains. Rome didn't just forge warriors, it rewrote their souls. At dawn, the trumpet sounded, and the legion formed ranks. A veteran stood tall, until his centurion stepped forward and ripped the medals from his chest. The phalae hit the ground with a cold clang, louder than any insult. Rome's punishment didn't just bruise flesh, it erased honor. That was its brilliance, not breaking bodies, but destroying a soldier's identity before his brothers. These shaming rituals followed strict patterns. Guilty men stood barefoot, wearing signs listing their crimes. Some hauled stones through camp as others mocked them. Others weren't allowed to bathe, marked by filth instead of armor. The humiliation didn't end with the ritual. Letters reveal men still shunned months later, left to eat alone or sleep near the latrines. Some even volunteered for deadly missions, hoping death might wash away disgrace. Modern armies aim to correct behavior. Rome erased status. Losing a medal wasn't just symbolic, it was a soul ripped out. Discarded phalae, scratched and bent, still turn up at old camps. They tell stories of men stripped of identity. The system worked by weaponizing fear. Soldiers enforced discipline themselves, terrified of sharing another's fate. Redemption was possible, but only by becoming the enforcer. Rome didn't just control its soldiers, it rewired them. Mind first. The Roman legion shouldn't have worked. Its cruelty should have sparked revolt, not loyalty. Yet legionaries stayed fiercely devoted, even after enduring floggings and decimation. The secret? Trauma bonding. When men suffer together under extreme stress, they form deep, twisted attachments, even to their tormentors. In Rome, the same army that punished soldiers also protected them. Surviving decimation meant placing total trust in the very comrades who helped beat another man to death. The legion didn't just discipline men, it rewired them, forging loyalty through fear and shared guilt. Punishments followed strict, predictable rules. Disobedience always carried a cost, while obedience meant survival. Steal food, get beaten, flee battle, face decimation. Soldiers quickly learned to calculate consequences like merchants tallying loss. This logic-based brutality created a warped fairness. While modern armies inspire with ideals, Rome bound its soldiers through shared trauma. After taking part in executions, troops fought harder, clinging to the legion for forgiveness and purpose. Even Rome's enemies copied its discipline. Rebels mimicked fustuarium, decimation, and rank stripping because it worked. Rome didn't just conquer, it replicated. The genius wasn't in cruelty, but in using it to erase disobedience. Rome didn't break men to destroy them, it remade them into weapons. Its true conquest wasn't land, it was human nature. Rome's discipline wasn't about fairness, it was about erasing hesitation. The real battle wasn't against Gauls or Carthaginians, but against human nature itself. Every punishment, from decimation to flogging, rewired soldiers to obey without thought. That's why we're left with an uncomfortable question. If you'd stood in that line drawing lots, would you have raised the club or prayed for death? The answer says more about power than we might admit. If this glimpse behind Rome's shield wall made you think, hit subscribe. Tell us below, could any army today use such methods? Your thoughts might shape our next deep dive.